It looks like we're at time and ready to start. Hi, folks. My name is Jessie Corcoran. I'm the Resource and Narrative Development Coordinator at the UW Population Health Institute. And this is Niceness is not anti-racism, how white women can and must step up their game. And I'll turn it over to Nestic to introduce herself as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nestic Morris, and I'm the Outreach Coordinator at the Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Yes, and Nestic and I used to work together at WCASA, and we still just can't keep away from each other, apparently, and we need to keep presenting together on these kinds of topics, and so we're lucky that we continue to be able to do that. So right before we get started too, making sure that you have some pen and paper nearby that'll be helpful for some of our activities as we go through the next hour and 15 minutes together. So anything else you want to add, Nestic?
Nope.
Awesome. So, got to share our disclaimers. So first of all, just want to point out that our session today is really meant to be an opportunity for white women to dig deeper into some of their failings, their mistakes, their perpetrated harms. And so again, like I've mentioned, we're going to have some journaling time built into the presentation today. We won't ask you to share what you journal about, but I just want to say, you know, as with everything, you're going to get out of this what you put into it. So your participation in the activities is key for what you will take away from today. The other thing I want to point out is that as we dig into our, failures and our mistakes, that kind of growth is difficult and we may have tough feelings. And I want you today to really focus on letting yourself feel those things. It's really common, I think, the second we have this feeling like, oh my God, I messed up, or have some sort of feelings of guilt or shame about something, our first instinct is, oh my God, how do I make this feeling go away? Right? Like, what do I do to not feel this bad, negative thing that I'm feeling right now? And oftentimes we can rush into either being defensive, right, defending ourselves, or we rush into an action like, oh, well, I'll go donate some money, or I'll buy a Black Lives Matter sign, or I will, et cetera, et cetera. And all of that, I believe, is really to make us push the feeling away rather than sit with the feeling, right? Invite it in. Talk with it a little bit, have a conversation, name it, figure out where it came from. What is that about? Because I really believe, and we really believe, that you have to be able to process that in order to actually make your next anti-racist actions much more productive and meaningful. So again, just saying, might have tough feelings, that's maybe a good thing, right? Let's sit with those today. Nestic, I'll turn it over to you.
We are asking for you to put your defenses down, open up your heart, be willing to check yourself and your privilege. We are also firm believers in you don't know what you don't know, but we are also going to hold you accountable as well. So those third and those fourth points gives you the opportunity to get up and go if that's what you want to do. We are about to take a ride on the accountability train. Jessie and I are not afraid to have the conversation, the race conversation, particularly when we're talking about white women. We are very intentional about the topics, the terms, and all the things that are discussed. What we hold to be true for the last 4 years is that accountability, co-conspiracy, and allyship, all of those go together. And what we also know to be true is that most people aren't ready to have this conversation. If we were in person, I would tell you that you are not chained to your doors, you're not chained to your seat. So please feel free to get up and leave if that's what you want to do. Like I said, we've been doing this for 4 years. We effectively call this the Nestic and Jessie Show. And so please be ready. We're going to be talking about some things that make people uncomfortable, and you are not obligated to stay here if that's what you want to do. We'll be talking about Black people. This will be Black centered. And so if Blackness makes you uncomfortable, please feel free to get up and go. Please go to a different session. There are some amazing sessions going on, and we don't want you to stay here. We don't want you to miss out. We cannot walk you through your fragility, at least not for free. But if you would like to contract us in, please feel free, and we'll walk you through all the fragility that you have. To the folks of color in the space, I stand here in complete solidarity with you. My liberation, my people's liberation is tied into your people's liberation. So if you are in the grassroots fighting for systemic change, please understand that my people's liberation is tied in your people's liberation. Society has done a great job of letting us think that we are not fighting the exact same fight, which is, in the words of Brandy Grayson, white supremacy, white invasion, patriarchy, and capitalism. So I bring you the blackest, warmest, unapologetic love that I can. Go ahead, Jessie.
Thanks, Mystic. And I also want to point out, it's really difficult with the platform we're using for the kind of interaction and in-person accountability to take place. But even if in the chat, if there's some accountability offered to you on something you share or talk about, again, I just invite folks to thank that person, sit with that, think on what that means for you, and not rush again to defensiveness, but just to continue to sit with what we learned today. So I got to show this video that Nestic likes to show, and I'll let you speak on it, Nestic, when it finishes.
Hey, I have a sense of what the problem is. I am not prejudiced. I get substantial donations to help inner city programs. Now, I have countless black people in my employ, both at the farm, in my kitchens. Now, I think it's a crime, the way people take things out of context.
Absolutely. I think it would be wise to continue this discussion back in our room.
But why? What's that?
I don't know. I just have a weird feeling.
Oh, hang on. You don't think that they think that I'm a... No, it's just a puppet show.
I can't spend the rest of my time with some ding-dong like that following me around. Isolation perpetuates the rumors.
That you hate black people.
Look, it was the 80s, all right? Everybody was a moron in the 80s. I just want to be able to walk around here without everybody looking at me like I'm some kind of terrified bigot. I sincerely regret it. But they did promote fresh food. I mean, there was a message. Fine. Listen, I'm going to tell you the truth. I did a lot of blowback in the early 80s, and it kept me thin and awake, but it didn't do much for my cultural sensitivity or my bank account or my gynecological health. Now, the chips fell, I eventually moved on, and here I am. But it can get lonely, you know? I'm trying to put a brave face on it, but to tell you the truth, I could use some friends, other than a skinny hippie always in crisis. You know, it's hard enough being in here without feeling everybody hates me.
Ever occurred to you that it's racist to assume that black people are going to beat you up for being racist?
And you have a good point there. Right, all right, look, I'm trying. I mean, maybe I am a racist, maybe I'm just too stupid to know it, but shit, I am the friendliest racist that you are ever going to meet, so can't we all just get along?
All right, I'll talk to him, see what's up.
Great, thank you. Thank you, I really appreciate it. You are one of the good ones. No, I meant that as in people in general.
So if we were in person, we would have a little bit of time to unpack that and ask folks what were they thinking or what happened, what were they feeling in this session after seeing this. But for me, this is quintessential Madison. This is quintessential white women, well-intended white women who believe that as long as I'm nice, I can still be racist. If you took a look in the chat yesterday, it was some peak whiteness going on, peak well-intended white women. I'm like, how privileged do you have to be to tell the woman who wrote the book on white fragility what she is saying is wrong? And so I just like to have this video to point out that being nice, nasty should not be a part of your anti-racism work.
Yeah, and there's a really long history of white women failing women of color as allies, right? And this, I know folks have seen this probably many times before, but this is the breakdown of how folks voted in the 2016 presidential election. And we can also talk about white men, but maybe that's for another day. Today, we're just focusing on white women. I do encourage any white men in the session to go get your people as well. But today, I'm a white woman, and I'm trying to talk to my people. And, you know, seeing this is a really clear example of how white women are choosing their whiteness, right, their proximity to power over, you know, what might be best for the country as a whole. And then we also get, you know, women who react to this information, right, and white women getting called out for overwhelmingly voting for Trump. And then there's an entire product line to make sure that you can tell folks, hey, but not this white woman, right? There's this rush to disavow ourselves of what that means, and instead of really wrestling with our role in white supremacy. Nesty, did you want to speak on this too before we? Okay. So I want to posit for you all today that we are all Amy Cooper. Amy Cooper is the woman who famously or infamously called the cops on a black man by the name of Christian Cooper while they were walking in the same park. And because he was, I believe, asking her to keep her dog on a leash, which is the rules of the park, she called the cops and was trying to tell them that a black man was threatening her life. So I'm here to say, instead of pushing away Amy Cooper and disavowing ourselves of her, we need to take a moment and look at how we are also Amy Cooper. And I'm going to back up for a second and come full circle on this. But so I want to jump to just talking about Dr. Joy DeGruy, who has been for a long time now researching and writing about and talking about something called post-traumatic slave syndrome. It's this idea that slavery has coded the DNA and has strongly influenced survival behaviors of Black Americans. And I know that's an oversimplification. I really encourage folks to look it up and learn more about it. But just to give you that background, right? And now some emerging research and theory is coming out, I think mostly led by a woman named Heather Hackman, exploring post-traumatic master syndrome, right? This idea that the very same legacy of slavery has also left lingering impacts on white people, including dissociation from racial trauma and feelings of superiority in white people, right? It shows up in how we carry ourselves, our mannerisms, how we treat other people, how we think of ourselves. And no matter how liberal we vote or think we might be, our ancestry still lies deep within our bones, coming out in ways that we may not even expect. So again, I'm proposing that maybe it's time we stopped rushing to condemn the Amy Coopers of the world and realize that we as white women are also Amy Cooper. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, Jessie, I never would have done that. That was awful. I can't believe she did that. I would never do that personally in that scenario, in that situation. And I hear you, and I'm even willing to believe you. But I also want to point out that it seems like Amy Cooper also didn't think she would have done that, right? She admitted to being ashamed of her behavior after the fact. But she may only be aware of her behavior because Christian Cooper and the world forced a mirror on her that day, right? We have to remember that Amy Cooper was also a liberal. She had a history of donating to liberal political candidates. And yet, right? So I want to say, let's stop putting distance between ourselves and Amy Cooper and start identifying with her. Say, she is my people. I am her. She is me. What is going on deep down inside that caused her to act that way? And in what ways am I doing the exact same thing? Or have I done the exact same thing in other scenarios, right? How am I rooting out my deeply held racism and superiority that hides in the shadows inside of me? How am I holding up a mirror to myself today and acknowledging my ugly? This is a tweet that really sums up a little bit. I think right after the vice presidential debate, there's a lot of women who were identifying with Kamala Harris's experience and some of her reactions to being talked over, for example. And this tweet just kind of called white women out and said, hey, you know, you think you're Senator Harris in this scenario, but you're actually the debate moderator. You're Susan Page, right? And you're doing kind of a crap job of actually using the power and privilege that you have to support this woman of color. So today we're going to talk on two different subjects, white supremacy and patriarchy, and anti-Blackness. For both of these, we're going to provide just a little bit of content, a little bit of lecture, so to speak, and then we want to ask you to use some journaling prompts to, again, dig into what our failures have been in some of these areas. We are not going to ask you to share what you journal about. We just don't have the platform right now to build the kind of trust to have those conversations, I don't think. But in the chat, we'll have some different prompts for the chat directly after that as well to think about how we're going to address these failures. And I just want to give a quick shout out to Me and White Supremacy, a guided journal from Layla F. Stodd. Her work not only helped me to dig a lot deeper and start becoming a better aspiring ally, but also is a little bit the inspiration for the activities that we have today. And one of the questions is very similar to one from her book as well. And I just want to give a shout out to her and her amazing work. So anything else, Nestic, before we go on? So white supremacy and patriarchy. We know that these issues are connected. We know this. This is just a handful of different headlines I've found over the last few years of just making this connection, right? We know that where there is misogyny and sexism, there is also white supremacy and white supremacy and racism. We know that although oppression is very complex and the way it is interconnected can be kind of confusing at times, and we're looking at ways that we suss that out, there's a clear connection, right, between these two things. Where there is racism, there is sexism, and vice versa. And yet, a lot of us white women showed up for the Women's March, but haven't been to a Black Lives Matter march or a protest for the family separation at the border or these other racial and ethnic justice issues. And so if these things are so connected, why aren't we doing a better job of taking anti-racist action alongside anti-sexist action? Around the Women's March that occurred right after Trump was inaugurated as president, there were a lot of women of color who decided to not partake in that march, right? Because the agenda did not reflect them, it did not involve them, it did not integrate them, and that there was a long history of feminism being very white and not actually speaking to the full breadth of experience of women, right? And so a lot of women responded, white women responded to women of color choosing not to participate in the Women's March with sentences like this. We should be at the Women's March. Show your solidarity with all women. I can't believe you're sitting this one out. This is about sisterhood. Don't be so divisive. We should be coming together to fight a common enemy. This isn't about white women or Black women. It's just about women. So when we say these things, we're asking women of color to choose between their gender and their race, right? We are demonstrating that We're not actually willing to take race into account when we set our white feminist agenda. And despite knowing, again, that these issues are so connected, we like to separate it out. Like race is just this completely different issue that will be discussed at a different time and place, but to be clear, a different time and place that we will not be joining, right? Which is really just sort of all lives mattering the issue. And I refer to this as using feminism as a weapon, right? Trying to use sisterhood, quote unquote, sisterhood against women of color. And there's nothing new about this, and Nestic's gonna speak some more on that.
So I refer to this as marching from the back. White women love Susan B. Anthony and the work that she did during the women's suffrage movement. However, I want everybody to be clear that Susan B. Anthony was a racist. She was quite the racist, and she made it very clear that she would rather have her arm cut off than to be fighting for Black women or Black people to be able to vote. People are, white women particularly, are mad at Bill Blur for what he talked about in his stand-up session. And white women have been hijacking movements since the beginning of time, and particularly during the women's suffrage movement. The women of Delta Sigma Theta sorority were already doing the work that Susan B. Anthony and her homegirls were already doing. They were doing it in their respective communities, in their respective churches and their universities. And they decided that they needed to be a part of the women's suffrage march. And Susan B. and her homegirls were like, we don't really need you, but we need you to make it look like this march is bigger than it is. So if you're going to march, you're going to have to march from the back. And the legacy of that still lingers to this day in all movements that pertain to women of color, particularly Black women. And so this is why you will not see me at a women's suffrage anything that has to do with white women taking over, hijacking, things of that nature. Bill did exactly what he was supposed to do. He used his platform and his voice, and he, what Black women called, gathered his white counterparts, brought them to the carpet, and that's what they were supposed to do. Black women are still fighting the fight from the back. I do the exact same work that my white counterparts do, on top of trying to navigate through a system that thinks that because I'm not smiling today, or I'm not using the correct tone and things of that nature. Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw talks about intersectionality theory, and we know once academia grabs a hold of something, it is a thing. However, this has not been, this isn't anything new, right? But she coined the term to talk about the different power structures in interacting in the lives of Black women. So when we talked about the women of Delta Sigma Theta already doing the work, they had to ask if it was okay for them to march. And they had to ask the Black men in their lives, but they also had to ask the white women. And that's that intersection of those different power structures interacting in the lives of Black women.
Another example I want to use of this intersection between white supremacy and patriarchy is through this piece that I found called "White Women Doing White Supremacy in Nonprofit Culture." I would argue that this is not only in nonprofit culture, but it's just one example, right? I think that this shows up in pretty much any workplace and probably a range of spaces. But three of the different things that they talked about in this article. One is a disavowal of power, right? White women, we have this complicated relationship between being oppressed and being privileged, right? And it leads us to regularly denying or downplaying just how much power we actually hold, and sort of clinging to this identity of, but we are also oppressed, and I am at a disadvantage. And it's not that, one or the other, right? I'm not trying to tell people that they're not oppressed as women. However, right, there's this disavowal of the power that we also hold. And it's important that we hold both of those at the same time. But we as white women don't do a terribly good job of that. There's also this role of performative anti-racism, right? And I will 100% admit that I still struggle with this, right? We get sucked into playing the liberal Olympics. And I can say, as a person who works for UW-Madison and who lives in Madison, that you get sucked into this trying to out-woke each other kind of performative thing. And again, where does that come from? It comes from this desire to distance ourselves from white supremacy rather than actually wrestle with what our role in it is and see what we can do differently and what we can change and what we need to, take a hard, long look at ourselves about. Plus, niceness above all else, right? And I'm actually going to read a quote from this piece that really helped solidify this for me and just hit home for me. So I'm going to read a direct quote. But they wrote that patriarchy seeds a deep fear of conflict in women, which is a tried and true strategy for keeping women in line. This fear of conflict is then reflected in white women's communication patterns. One insidious way white women prioritize niceness is by neutralizing discomfort. When critical feedback is offered, white women often turn the conversation towards looking on the bright side. Pointing out white supremacy is dismissed as being negative, right? This has the effect of shaming folks and dismissing essential information about impact. So I think this is also compounded by Midwest communication habits, right? There's this desire for an absence of conflict rather than a presence of justice, right? Which requires us to build these muscles for working through conflict and coming to solutions that actually, again, bring a presence of justice rather than trying to push conflict out of the room. So now we've arrived at our first journaling opportunity. I want you to have a pen and paper. I really do recommend pen and paper. There is actually some research to suggest that you get more out of writing exercises when you physically do it. But if you're more into writing on a word processing program on a computer, that's also fine. But we have two different potential journal prompts for you. The first one, I would ask you to just choose one. But the first one is, how have you participated in white supremacy? Again, maybe through those three items that I just mentioned: disavowal of power, performative anti-racism, and niceness above all else. Maybe you choose one of those to discuss and sort of dive deep and look at how you've participated in those things. And then once you do that, look at what has likely been the harm of your words or actions. Or the second journal prompt is, how have you used feminism as a weapon against women of color? What has likely been the harm of your words or actions? And again, that could be about, not showing up for, racial issues, or not, adequately integrating race into the work that you do. It could be a number of different things there. So yeah, what I'm going to do, we're going to give 10 minutes for this. So we're going to give until 1:10 p.m. For you to do this journaling. In the meantime, I am theoretically, hopefully, about to stream a little bit of piano music in the background to help folks who struggle with silence. Sometimes I do as well. So yeah, we'll return at 1:10. All right, we are at 1:10 p.m., so I'm going to bring us back. Thank you all for spending some time reflecting on some ways that we've participated in white supremacy. For the chat, what I would like to do is ask folks to share what are some steps you'd like to take to address your participation in white supremacy, with the goal of ending our participation in white supremacy, recognizing that this is really a lifelong journey and that you're probably never going to completely finish, right, separating yourself from white supremacy, but right, that's the goal, is to push to not be participating in this system and to actively be anti-racist. I'm not sure if some of our tech help and moderators would be able to let us know some things that are being said in the chat. Ways to address and end your participation in white supremacy. Gail or Crystal, are you able to share anything that's being said in the chat, since I can't see it?
Oh, sure. This is Gail. Jesse, I can certainly do that. So there's lots of good conversation in the chat, and we do have quite a few questions. The most recent question that came in is, are power and privilege the same thing? And is it possible to disavow power / feel powerless while still recognizing privilege?
So there's a difficulty there, right? So oftentimes when I talk about oppression, I also talk about power, because oftentimes we're just thinking about the quote unquote victims, right, of oppression, without recognizing that there's someone on the other end of that, right, who is holding power in that system as well. I don't think power in and of itself as a concept is necessarily a positive or a negative thing. It depends on how you're using it. So in order to, I think, name your privilege and your power, it's not maybe necessarily the same thing, right? Because you can use your power for good. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I've answered that question fully, though. I don't know, Nestic, if you have something to add as well.
I don't.
There's also questions and curiosities around, I'll just read the question. So a group of white female colleagues recently started a monthly discussion group around anti-racism. While well-intended, it seems to me like it's a place for white women to talk about the progress they're making and the great things they're doing, i.e. donating, writing letters, attending rallies, etc., in a bubble of whiteness. However, it would be super inappropriate to ask a Black woman to join the group, essentially making her a token rep of Black womanhood. What are ways you would suggest to get involved in groups as a white woman that give Black women the voice they deserve without exploiting them for their experience? And when you understand, oh yeah, I'll leave it there.
Sure. One thing that I want to name is that, I mean, as a white woman, you could still enter that space and name what's happening, right? Be able to be with our fellow white women and like be able to name like, hey, I think we're actually kind of dwelling on the things that we're doing well, but I would also like us to really dig deeper and think about what are we still messing up? What do we still need to improve upon? You know, and not just continue giving ourselves kudos for how far we've come, because yep, we're doing better than we were yesterday, and that's a good thing. And how do we keep moving forward, right? How do we push ourselves? How do we keep rooting out, you know, the racism and superiority and anti-Blackness that is still within us? Because it's still there. No matter how much I donate, how many, you know, Black Lives Matter bumper stickers I have, I still have this superiority, this inherent idea that I'm superior, or this inherent thought about, you know, my superiority as a white person or the way that I benefit from white supremacy, I'm continuing to benefit from it. So how am I rooting that out and how am I ending my participation in those things? And I think as white women, we need to start holding each other accountable to that. Over time, hopefully we build much more diverse relationships throughout our life where we have these much more authentic relationships with people of color where they can hold us accountable and tell us when we're doing something that's messed up, and we can take that information, not get defensive, not turn it back around on them, not, end our relationship with them, but be able to have that authentic conversation. And again, not seek an absence of conflict, but a presence of justice.
I do have something to say. Be clear that well-intending white women are just as problematic, if not more problematic, than flat-out racist women. Particularly, so I tell people all the time, and Jesse has been in the car with me for a million hours over the last 3 years, but I like my racism hard. I like my racism hard so that I know what I'm dealing with versus the well-intended white women who is just, like I said, causing more problems. So to recognize that this group probably, like you said, is well-intending. However, there's that aspect of that white bubble. And if you don't have rapport, particularly with Black women, you should not be asking them to come in and be a part of your group. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later, because she's going to call you out on your stuff, right? She's going to call you out. She's going to say, nope, you shouldn't be doing this, this, and that. However, how are you going to take it? So in many of my evaluation forms, you should see some of the horrible things that white women who are my colleagues or who are supposed to be my colleagues have so many horrible things to say about my tone and my facial expressions and all of these things. And so no matter if I'm talking about dogs, rainbows, puppies, and kids with glasses, I'm still going to be viewed as the angry Black woman. And there will be times where Jesse will be like, if I would have said that, that would have been perfectly fine and I would have been a leader. And I'm like, well, Jesse, there are things that as a Black woman that I have to maneuver no matter what whatever the conversation is. So if the women in this group aren't able to, aren't ready to have that conversation of a Black woman calling you out, calling you in, or whatever, that conversation needs to be had. And there are also things that I will not say because no matter what I say, white women aren't going to hear it. Like I said, they're going to focus on my tone. They're going to focus on my delivery. And so there are things where I'll be like, Jesse, you got to go get your people. You got to get your girls, get your homegirls, bring them to the carpet. But I will say it, but I need Jesse to say it. So it's kind of like me having an interpreter, and Jesse just happens to be my white interpreter. So you as a person, if you can understand that, whoever made this comment, if you are the person that understands that, that's where allyship comes in. I don't like to use allyship. I like to use co-conspirator because allyship is very nice and it's very fluffy. But when we're talking about race and bringing Black women and Blackness into the space, I need you to be a co-conspirator. I tell my white friends all the time, I need you to drive the getaway car. There have been times when Jesse literally has to drive the getaway car because we are going into small town Wisconsin. I don't drive around the state of Wisconsin by myself. My coworkers and my colleagues understand that if there's something that a program needs from me that is farther than the Dells, somebody has to come with me. And so that is what co-conspiracy looks like. That's literally driving the car. There have been times where Jesse has to drive 5 hours to Phillips, Wisconsin, do a session, and drive back because I'm just not safe. And so you as a co-conspirator, you need to bring that into the space.
Thanks, Mystic. I want to keep us moving along, and we're going to start talking about what is anti-Blackness. So Nestic, just let me know as we go along how you want me to advance the slides.
Okay. So if we were in person, I would ask you, what are the things that comes to mind when you hear me say the word anti-Blackness? If it's from a Black person, it's probably has to do with an experience. And then if it's from a white person or a non-Black POC, it has to do with a term, a definition. So you can go ahead and go ahead. Black women, white women, I'm gonna bring you to the carpet. You all are about to, I have Black friends, I have Black children, I have Black nieces and nephews, or I have a Black partner, us to death. Some of the things that white women in particular say to me to try and prove to me that they are not racist or they can't be, just all of these things. Y'all about to kill us about your Black friends and your Black children and your Black partner. As a Black woman, I walk through the world as a Black woman, and I'm perfectly fine with walking through the world as a Black woman. So please don't tell me that you don't see color. It's a part of who I am. It's not a term of endearment. You have dismissed a part of me before we've sat down and had a conversation. So I know that you can see that I'm a Black woman and Jessie is not. So it is a part of who I am. Just because you have Black friends, you have Black children or a Black partner does not stop the fact that you as a white person continue to benefit from white supremacy and white invasion. If your Black friends aren't able to come to you and have a gut-wrenching conversation about the state of Black affairs, where we are right now, without you trying to justify it, without you getting defensive, without you playing devil's advocate, please stop playing devil's advocate. It is super condescending for you to play devil's advocate with people of color's real life experiences. So if you are not able to do that, you do not have Black friends, you just know a couple of Black people. Go ahead, Jess. So we're going to talk about plantation life, the legacy of colorism, and how the foundation of American society is rooted in anti-Blackness. Go ahead, Jesse. So by definition, anti-Blackness is the resistance or antagonistic towards Black people, their values, and their objects. That's according to dictionary.com, but Dr. Monique Liston out of Milwaukee was on an episode of United Shades of America, and I love her definition. She says that it is, anti-Blackness is your acceptance to Black people's dignity. It could come from both Black people and, it could come from both white people and non-Black POC. I have experienced some of the most anti-Blackness that I have experienced in a professional setting from non-Black women non-Black POC folks. If I could tell you some of the stories, you would be, Black women would not be surprised, but you would be mortified at some of the things, some of the anti-Blackness I have experienced within the BIPOC community. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. So historically, for Black people, colorism started on the plantation. There's the concept of the field nigger, house nigger concept. Yes, the Black lady just said nigger in a presentation, but again, I am intentional about the things that I discuss. So you don't need to write that in the evaluation forms because yes, I said it. So the field nigger, house nigger concept is the concept that darker Black people were kept in the field. They did all of the picking the cotton, the grueling, intensive work. They were in the fields for 10, 12 hours with little to no breaks. And the lighter skinned Black people were kept in the house and they were called the house niggers. They did the cooking, the cleaning, raising children, things along those lines because slave masters and their wives were more comfortable with lighter skinned Black people. And so this is a perfect example of the foundation. I did a little wordplay there. Maybe you got it, maybe you didn't. But this just talks about, this picture depicts how we are discussing colorism and that proximity to whiteness. So the great Brandy Grayson says to get as far away from Blackness as you can. So if we start up here in the corner and we talk about the cool, right, and that's white. And the further away you get from it is the darkness. So again, non-Black folks of color hold on to that proximity to whiteness. We talked about that in the model minority. And if you were in the chat yesterday, there was a whole lot of oppression Olympics playing. And so we talk about what's white is supposed to be right. And anything outside of that is wrong. America has this sick and twisted history of white women weaponizing their whiteness to dictate the actions of people around them. And so when we talked earlier about Amy Cooper, all she knew that all she had to do was mention a Black man, and that police departments or the folks around her would come to her rescue as far as being the white damsel in distress. And so that comes up in police departments as well. I also always get white women who are defending their husband who is a police officer, and it's like, hey, your police officer husband may be a good dude. However, he comes from a system of originally slave catchers. And with slave catchers, their job was to bring the Black body, police the Black body, and bring it back dead or alive. And we just have a new Black man who was killed by a police department, right? And so again, your husband may be a good dude. However, there's the legacy of policing Black bodies and bringing them back dead or alive. And the legacy of that still lingers to this day. You can talk about Carol Bryant, who is responsible for being the white damsel in distress and killing Emmett Till. She said a couple of years ago that this never happened. She made it all up. I don't know if she was trying to get into purgatory or heaven or whatever. However, Black people knew that this woman was lying from the beginning. And so the history of weaponizing their whiteness to dictate the actions of people and police around them. You do what I say or you die. And so there's no difference between Amy Cooper and Carol Bryant. The only difference is that there was a camera or footage to say that this woman was lying. So you can go ahead and. So these are just a couple of examples of how the things that Black and brown girls get, or women get shamed and shunned for, white girls get celebrated for, white women get celebrated for. And I saw this is a perfect example of just a couple of the things that, whether it be in academia, whether it be in professional settings, the same thing. And another example of that would be 16 and Pregnant, or Teen Mom, OG. There is not a network on TV that would have celebrated Black and brown girls getting pregnant at 16 and paying them $75,000 to $100,000 per episode. Bristol Palin has 2 children, and she has 2 children out of wedlock. And apparently she's still the poster child for abstinence-only education. And she made it very clear that her children's father would not be in their lives. And everybody was like, good for her. She's such a strong woman for wanting to raise those kids by herself. But if that was inner city Milwaukee or Chicago with Black and brown girls, people would have wanted to know if this is where my tax dollars are going. And so Black women are always at the intersection of something, and they have to choose their womanness or their Blackness, and in a way that white women particularly don't have to do so. You can go to the next slide. So we talked a little bit about this earlier, but I saw this floating around, and it just talks about the mind Olympics that Black women have to play when they are trying to be firm, trying to be warm, trying to be honest and direct. and the many different faces that was made, and how white women were like, yes, we adore her for doing all of these things. But these are the very same faces, the very same things that if you are the supervisor of a Black woman, you're going to HR for, to have them written up for being angry and for being combative, for not being a team player. So we want to know, which one is it? Like, do you love it or don't you love it? You can go to the next slide, Jessie.
All right. So we would like to ask you all again to participate in a journaling reflection exercise around our anti-Blackness. So again, just choose one of these. I just sometimes provide more than one journal prompt because sometimes different words speak to people. But journal prompts being, how have you stereotyped, feared, fetishized, avoided, collected, dehumanized, and harmed Black men, women, and children? Or if you prefer something a little bit more general, just where and how has your anti-Blackness shown up? So we're going to give about 9 minutes until 1:40 p.m. We'll return, and then we'll do another quick chat question and a little bit of wrap up. All right, folks, thanks again for taking some time to journal and reflect. I appreciate the engagement in these activities. I want to go ahead and throw up the question that we want to, have you all also discuss in the chat about how you're going to root out your anti-Blackness. And as you're adding some things to the chat, we just want to address a couple of questions that have come up that have been shared with us. I know that we don't have time to answer all of the questions. Happy to try to follow up with some of you as we can later. But I know one of the questions was around, tools for white women to counteract this defensiveness when a Black, Indigenous, or person of color tries to point out some offensive behavior, call them out, call them in, whatever kind of language you want to use. And I do want to say that, the response there is really to just like take a moment as the person who's being called out or called in and, listen and try to exercise that muscle of not jumping to that defensiveness, right? It has to be a personal choice to notice that that's happening within you and make a choice to stop it and try to be in the moment and pay attention. And so I do want to point out there is a graphic that I've seen that's just a nice way to lay out what you can do instead when you're being called out or called in. And it's called CLAIM, C-L-A-I-M. If you Google it, you'll probably be able to find it. But the C is center yourself, realize that you're not being attacked, you're a good person. This is just about your behavior and stopping harm. L is listen, don't interrupt or think of ways to defend yourself, focus on learning what was harmful. A is acknowledge and apologize, right? Instead of jumping to explaining why you did something or said something, acknowledge what happened and apologize if there was harm. The I in claim is inquire. This is sort of optional. It kind of is dependent upon whether or not you have the appropriate relationship with this person, but you may inquire as to some resources or ask what you could have done instead or how to make amends. But ultimately, M in claim is moving forward, which is just that the best apology is changed behavior, right? And just thinking about what you're going to do differently the next time to make sure that you don't cause harm again. So that's just one resource for folks. Also heard that there's a lot of questions around how we learn and continue to integrate our lives when our world and our community is still so segregated. And I just want to say there's a lot that it feels like we as individuals don't have control over, but I would encourage you to think about the things that you do have control over, right? What kind of people do you follow on social media? What kind of events do you go to when we have events, right? In person, again, it will happen. I'm very hopeful and confident. But, do you attend any cultural events? Do you try to broaden your horizons that way? Do you step outside of your white zone and, go to these other public spaces or events to participate and to be in community with people who don't look like you, right? We do have control over some of these aspects of our lives, and we just have to take the steps to do it and to start diversifying our circles and our world. So there are ways that we can do that. I can't tell you exactly the ways that are right for you, but I think that there are opportunities. Nestic, what words do you want to add and share at this time?
There was something in the chat about, I'm sorry, let me try and pull it up, about respecting people who decide not to engage in marches and rallies and things along those lines. And I think that like I said earlier, we need folks in the streets and we need folks in the suites and we need people in between. And so your fight may look different than somebody else's. However, you are needed in whatever space you're in. Your anti-racism work is needed. And so to think, or we need to get away from the notion that if you're not in the streets, grassroots fighting, then somehow your fight is minimized. And whoever asked that question, that's a great question, great thing to bring up. And so, yeah, you're needed wherever you are. And
Awesome.
I
It
think
looks,
that is all the time that we have.
yeah, I think we're at time. Thank you all again for joining us and, you know, attempting to embark upon this self-growth journey. It is a long one and it can be difficult, but it is better when it's done in community with one another in any way that we can. So appreciate your engagement today. I'm going to go ahead and play this video. I know we're going to go over time, so for anyone who has to leave, I totally get it. It's about a 3-minute video. It's still very inspirational. It's from a few years ago, but it's still very, very relevant today, especially with the election around the corner. So just wanted to share this as well as our parting words. And yeah, thanks again.
You know, America's not unique in its sins as a country. We're not unique in our evils, to be honest with you. I think where we may be singular is our refusal to acknowledge them. And the legends and myths we tell about our inherent, you know, goodness to hide and cover and conceal so that we can maintain a kind of willful ignorance that protects our innocence. See, the thing is that when the Tea Party was happening, we were saying, pundits, oh, it's just about economic populism. It's not about race. When people knew, social scientists were already writing that what was driving the Tea Party were anxieties about demographic shifts, that the country was changing, that they were seeing these racially ambiguous babies on Cheerios commercials, that the country wasn't quite feeling like it was a white nation anymore. And people were screaming from the top of their lungs, yo, this is not just simply economic populism. This is the ugly underbelly of the country. See, the thing is this, and I'll say this and I'll take the hit on it. There are communities that have had to bear the brunt of America confronting, white Americans confronting the danger of their innocence. And it happens every generation. So somehow we have to kind of, oh my God, is this who we are? And just again, here's another generation of babies. Think about it, a 2-year-old had his bones broken by 2 parents trying to shield him from being killed. A woman who has been married to this man for as long as I've been on the planet almost, lost her husband. For what? And so what we know is that the country has been playing politics for a long time on this hatred. We know this. So it's easy for us to place it all on Donald Trump's shoulders. It's easy for us to place Pittsburgh on his shoulders. It's easy for me to place Charlottesville on his shoulders. It's easy for us to place El Paso on his shoulders. This is us. And if we're going to get past this, we can't blame it on him. He's a manifestation of the ugliness that's in us. I've had the privilege of growing up in a tradition that didn't believe in the myths and the legends because we had to bear the brunt of them. Either we're going to change, Nicole, or we're going to do this again and again, and babies are going to have to grow up without mothers and fathers, uncles and aunts, friends, while we're trying to convince white folk to finally leave behind a history that will maybe, or embrace a history that might set them free from being white. Finally.
What else?
Lord help us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes.